I have a public health degree. But first class, see that? Right, the gold one up on the wall there. That's my first class honours degree, right? So, and I really, really enjoyed the study of public health,
Mm,
and public health is absolutely fascinating. It's kind of like the poor cousin of medicine. It's not even really within medicine,
mm,
um, but the basic premise of public health is that any intervention, any public health intervention should be tailored to do the maximum benefit and the minimum harm.
Please follow us on Instagram at High Carb Health, and don't forget to click on that green H so you follow our stories and get to see everything that we eat and do throughout the day. If you haven't subscribed to our YouTube channel, click on that subscribe button and the bell notification icon so you are notified of all future videos. Hello everyone, welcome to another video, and today I'm joined by Robyn Chuter, who's actually been on our channel before. So some of you who've been watching us for a while will remember her from some gut health videos that we did. But today's topic is a different topic. We're talking about viruses, and welcome again to the channel, Robyn.
Thanks for having me back on. It's a pleasure to be with your audience.
Fantastic. So I'll get Robyn to start off by just explaining a little bit about her background, and then we're going to go into the topic of this test that we're using at the moment for COVID-19, which is the PCR test. So yeah, Robyn, I'll just get you to quickly just introduce yourself.
Yeah. Okay. So again, my name's Robyn Chuter, and I am a certified lifestyle medicine practitioner. So certified by the Australasian Society of Lifestyle Medicine. Lifestyle medicine, for people who are not familiar with it, means essentially using all the elements of lifestyle: diet, exercise, sleep hygiene, stress management, and what you might call broadly social connection to build and restore people's health.
Mm, absolutely. And so, today's topic obviously is something that's, I think, really important that people understand how, how we diagnose these conditions, these viral infections. And yeah, I think, first of all, just explain to the audience, what is going on at the moment in terms of how COVID-19 is being diagnosed, how viruses in general get diagnosed, and how this test works.
Yeah, that's a set of really interesting questions. So let's start off with a couple of, I suppose, technical distinctions about the language that's being thrown around currently. First
Mm,
of all, there is a new, you might say, disease entity that's been recognized called COVID-19, which is short for coronavirus disease 2019. Now,
mm,
the virus which is believed to be causing this syndrome is a newly discovered coronavirus called SARS-CoV-2. So the virus is SARS-CoV-2, the disease is COVID-19. Now, a
mm,
lot of people are just talking about coronavirus disease. Well, there are 6 coronaviruses that we know infect human beings. Well, there's 7 now. I mean, there were 6
mm,
previously. Four,
yep,
four that are endemic to the population. That is, there are 4
mm,
coronaviruses that have been with us for somewhere between a couple of decades and over a century in one particular case. And
mm,
these commonly circulating coronaviruses cause just upper respiratory tract infections, colds and flu-like illness, basically.
mm,
And then, of course, we've got SARS and then MERS being the 2 coronaviruses that kind of, went global in a big way. And then SARS-CoV-2 is, the latest epidemic or pandemic coronavirus.
mm,
So, okay, how do we diagnose viral diseases? Well, traditionally, viral diseases have been diagnosed based on symptoms. So, if you have a runny nose, sore or scratchy throat, you've been sneezing, coughing, you're running a fever, you might go to the doctor and
mm,
say, look, I'm actually really crook. And
mm,
the doctor, if that the doctor may or may not actually run a test on you. Okay, very often the doctor will just say, you've got the flu, go home, drink fluids, I'll give you a certificate so you can stay home from work for a couple of days, you'll be fine. What we don't see is people just going along to get tested for a viral illness when they don't have any symptoms. I mean, there's no historical precedent for this, okay?
Absolutely.
So, right. Let's talk about the test itself. So there are two broad types of tests that have been developed in order to attempt to diagnose people who are sick with a respiratory illness, to determine whether it's actually COVID-19 caused by SARS-CoV-2 or something else, or to determine whether they've had past exposure. So the main test that's being used is the PCR test, or the polymerase chain reaction test. And what this is, it's actually a DNA manufacturing technique. So it was originally discovered, or the test, I'm sorry, was developed by Kari Mullis, who actually won the Nobel Prize for developing the PCR test. And it's a way of amplifying genetic material, DNA initially, which exists in tiny amounts. It's a way of actually amplifying that so that you can study that material much more easily in a laboratory setting. And so that's what Mullis developed the test for. Mullis himself, he died just last year, August of last year, just before all of this, started happening. And Mullis was absolutely vehement that this PCR test was not to be used to diagnose a viral illness. That is not the intent of this test. It can detect genetic material, including genetic material from viruses, but the presence of viral genetic material does not equate to infection. It absolutely does not. Now, in the case of this of SARS-CoV-2, this newly discovered coronavirus, like all other coronaviruses, it's an RNA virus. So we, humans, our genetic material is DNA, which is a double strand. You might have seen the image of DNA. It's like a spiral staircase, right? You've got two strands of genetic material that wrap around. There are bridges between them. Well, RNA viruses actually only have one strand of genetic material. And so in order to do the PCR test, what has to happen is, firstly, the RNA from what is presumably viral material has to be sort of like converted, you might say, into DNA, because the PCR test can only use DNA, it can't use RNA, right? Now, there's actually a 50% error rate in that conversion process, like converting the RNA to DNA. So right there in the beginning of the test, you've already got potential error. And then what happens is the DNA that you've actually sort of like created or manufactured from the RNA, and sorry, that genetic material comes from a swab, right? So you get this like a long cotton bud, and the cotton bud is inserted either up the nose or right at the back of the throat to get a sample of material. It's basically like a scraping of cells from the surface of your respiratory membranes, and that's what is put through this test. So, so in other words, that sample can be contaminated with your own human DNA, and then there's viral RNA. So they've got to, first of all, copy out the RNA to make it DNA, high error rate. And then once you've got that sample of DNA, you then put it through repetitive cycles of heating and cooling. And so every time you do that, you basically double the genetic material. Okay, so every cycle of heating and cooling results in a doubling of genetic material. And at a certain point, you've got enough of this genetic material where you can, run some sequencing on it. You can basically see whether that whether that genetic material is from a virus, is from a particular virus, like an influenza virus or coronavirus or whatever have you. But
Right.
the other thing to bear in mind is that the PCR test for SARS-CoV-2 is
Mm.
actually only, if you like, looking for two pieces of genetic material out of a total of 10. So it's looking for two specific sequences of genetic material,
Mm-hmm.
but the whole virus has, well, at least 10. So it's only looking
Right.
for certain fragments of
Mm-hmm.
that virus. Okay.
Okay.
Um, a lot of people assume that the test is either negative or positive. The material is either there or it's not. And if it was there, then most people assume that if it's there, okay, you've got the virus, therefore you're infected. If it's not there, you don't have the virus, therefore you're not. It doesn't work that way.
Mm.
The test is rated as either positive or negative based on the number of cycles of this heating and cooling process that the genetic material has been put through. Okay,
Mm.
and this is
Right.
what's called the cycle threshold. So there, out of the, I think it's about 20 odd PCR tests that have been approved for use in Australia. And the
Mm-hmm.
cycle threshold is generally like 35 to 40. So if after 35 to 40 sequences of heating and cooling, this particular genetic sequence that they're looking for kind of like shows up, then that
Mm-hmm.
person is said to have a positive result.
Right.
However, if you look at the literature on what should be classed as a positive in PCR testing, there's general agreement that that's too high of a cycle threshold. Like you shouldn't be calling that a positive. In
Mm-hmm.
other words, if you carry out enough of these heating and cooling cycles, you can pretty much find that genetic material wherever you're looking. Okay, so that's the big limitation. So it's well established among virologists that the presence of this genetic material does not equate to infection. So it wasn't just Kari Mullis who developed
Mm.
the test who's saying this. And I mean, I'll just switch over to a screen share for a moment, and I will show you a couple of sample reports from the literature.
Yep.
So, all right, here's a sample. Actually, we'll go back to this sentence. A direct role of certain viruses in the pathogenesis, meaning like the development of disease, of a specific respiratory illness is not possible to establish on clinical grounds, which is further complicated when multiple respiratory viruses are detected simultaneously in the same specimen. This
Mm.
is really important because we're breathing in bacteria and viruses. We're absolutely surrounded by all sorts of microbes, and then non-microbes. Viruses are technically not living, and
Mm.
so that single sample, that single swab that's taken could contain genetic material from any number of pathogens. So if the person has symptoms, it's not possible to tell if you isolate one particular organism that that organism is the cause of the symptoms that they're experiencing. But the
Mm-hmm.
next sentence is really, really important. Detecting viral genomes, so the genetic material of viruses, in respiratory secretions, basically, snot and mucus, does
Mm.
not necessarily correlate with viral replication, which means that you might find the virus's genetic material there, but that doesn't mean that the virus is actually replicating or reproducing. And if it ain't reproducing, it ain't causing an infection, that
Yes.
particular virus anyway. It may reflect latency, that is, the person has got a virus on board and it's working on making them sick, or prolonged shedding unrelated to the current symptoms. That is, they might have encountered that virus, their immune system has actually dealt with it,
Mm.
but they're still going to show up with this genetic material for some time afterward. Therefore, approaches based on the detection of viable viral progeny, that is, viruses that are capable of replicating,
Mm.
or markers of active viral replication, should be used in studies of pathogenesis of respiratory viruses. Well, we're not seeing that with this particular test.
Right.
Now, how would you determine viable viral progeny? Well, to do that, what you have to do is to take those samples of genetic viral genetic material that you found in, on the swab. And then you carry out what are called viral culture studies, where you take that genetic material and you kind of like inject it into cultures that are growing like in a petri dish, and you see whether the cells that you've injected that viral material into show the classic signs of viral infection. Okay. Now, these viral culture studies, very, very few of them have been done. And the WHO actually acknowledges that. Here we go. So here's, sorry, I should just show you where this is coming from. So this is a textbook called Respiratory Viral Infections. That's where I got that quote from. Now, if we have a look at this one, this is actually from the WHO's website.
Yes.
And here's the quote that I want to highlight here. Detection of viral RNA does not necessarily mean that a person is infectious and able to transmit the virus to another person. Studies using viral culture of patient samples to assess the presence of infectious SARS-CoV-2 are currently limited. And then they go on to describe there have been a couple of cases. So they got one viable virus from an asymptomatic case. But again, there's no proof that asymptomatic case actually transmitted it to anybody else, which is really critical. But once again, these viral culture studies are extremely limited, and in a if you have a look at some of the meta-analyses and so forth, you can see that here we go. So this is actually basically like an evidence review of the transmission of coronavirus, of the SARS-CoV-2, while pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic.
Right.
Once again, I mean, right here in the paper, it says the detection of SARS-CoV-2 RNA in pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic persons does not prove that they can transmit the virus to others. And when you look at the epidemiological reports that they've done, where they've actually found pre-symptomatic or asymptomatic people, they actually haven't been able to show that these people, particularly the asymptomatics, transmitted it to anyone at all. So these are epidemiological reports where they're doing essentially contact tracing.
Yeah.
And nada, just it's not happening. There was a recent study from China, which so this is the summary table here. The total numbers of people involved: 3,410 close contacts of 391 indexed cases. Now, what this means, like the index case is the person who's sick, and the 3,410 close contacts are, people who lived with that person, worked with them, whatever. Okay. And so what they found in this, very briefly, is that of the asymptomatic people, of which there were, if my memory serves me correctly, 351, there was one case of secondary infection, and even that sort of wasn't guaranteed that they got sick from being in contact with this asymptomatic person. Sorry, let me just go back there. So yeah, you've got like asymptomatic people, you've got one index case. Oh, sorry, that wasn't what I was looking for. There's a table here. I'll share these with you if you like. You can put them in the show notes. So in any case, what they found is that there's a vanishingly small risk of people who, are found to have the virus on a PCR test but don't have any symptoms, actually passing it on to somebody else. And that's essentially because the presence of that virus in a person's respiratory tract secretions does not mean that they're either infected or infectious. Okay, does that make sense? Do you want me to go back over any of that to make it clearer, or are we cool?
Fully makes sense to me. I guess maybe we should try and kind of work this out in less formal kind of connotation. Say for example, let me just kind of explain this to you. Maybe in the past I've been exposed to a lot of viruses. I've had viral infections. Yeah. I mean, before I went plant-based, I used to get sick way more often, and maybe it's something we can talk about as well. So, I mean, my experience of going to the doctor was look down your throat, take your temperature, I've never had a test for viral infection in my life.
Yep. Yep.
Okay. And they said, oh, you probably got a virus. Just go home. There's no medication we can give you anyway to deal with the virus. And,
Yep.
just wait it out. Take a few days off work. Stay at home.
Yep.
And so I guess the way I can kind of explain that is, in the past, let's talk about different viruses that we've been exposed to and had in the past. If you were sick, you were told you need to stay home. If you're not
Yes.
sick, no one ever thought that you were a potential risk to their health.
100%.
Right? So we're in the
bang on.
workplace, we were out in the general population, cafes, bars, stadiums, all sorts of places. Someone starts coughing, you kind of you stay away from them.
Yeah.
But if no one's
you kind
coughing,
of look at them and go, do you know what, dude? You ought to stay home and stop spreading your infectious materials over everybody else. Yeah.
Absolutely. But if someone doesn't have a temperature, they're not coughing and splattering everywhere, you'd never even think twice to think that they're gonna cause you any harm. And I think what that study kind of shows is that if you're not showing any symptoms of disease, then there's almost impossible chance that you're going to pass that on.
Yes. And
there is a slight. What is the risk that you could? The risk. You've shared
again,
that.
Based on now, I think it was about a month ago when Dr. Maria van Kerkhove, who's one of the sort of she's on the in the WHO. She is what's her role? Lead technical.
I think she's like the face. She's on all the interviews and things.
Long brown hair. Very, very, very smart woman with a long background in public health, and she actually said that based on the very detailed contact tracing reports that had been submitted to the WHO, asymptomatic transmission was unlikely to be a significant driver. Of this pandemic, and that's been confirmed in several studies. I've shown you, on the screen several of those, and she was there was all sorts of brouhaha after that, and she was interviewed the following day and said, look, let me be clear, I'm not saying it doesn't happen, I'm not saying it never happens, but I am saying that we have very little evidence that it's happening to any significant degree, and that makes perfect sense.
Absolutely.
And this latest study from China that I showed you basically indicates that the degree of severity of symptoms correlates with the infectiousness. So with the likelihood that a person who is infected and sick is going to spread it around to other people. And the hallmark symptom that indicated the likelihood of transmitting it onward was expectoration.
Yes.
So if you are coughing or herking up, viral, because that's the way viruses work. They, your body's response to viral infection is that your T cells, part of the immune system, detects virus-infected cells and it kills them.
Yes.
Okay. And then those cells basically explode and they disgorge their contents into the respiratory tract. And that, by the way, is how you can detect viral particles, right? Well, that's one of the ways that you can test positive.
Yes.
Is because cells that have actually been knocked off by the immune system, and then almost like vomited their contents into the respiratory tract. Those contents include little fragments of killed virus that have been killed by the immune system's response to this.
So if what you're saying is right, what you're saying is that the body's immunodefense system might have already destroyed that viral infected cell, and you may have gained long-term defense or immunity against that virus, and then you're going to get this test and you're going to be positive and they think you're infected, or in fact you've actually healed yourself
You've
from
already
the
dealt with it. And
yeah.
there's clear evidence that people who are fully recovered can continue to shed the virus for weeks and in a very small number of or small percentage of cases, maybe even months. Again, because these viral particles continue to be shed from cells that have been dealt with by this immune response. So, but on the other hand, if you're sick, you're actively infectious. Sorry, to clarify this, I should point out that viruses are what's called an intracellular pathogen.
Right.
They can only make you sick if they get into your cell, they hijack your DNA, your genetic material, and they use your genetic material to make copies of themselves. Then those copies kind of, spew out of the cell, and then they're kind of let loose in your body to go and infect other cells.
Yes.
And we know that the way that this particular coronavirus gains access to the cell is through docking with ACE2, the angiotensin converting enzyme 2, which is supposed to respond to a hormone that we make ourselves. But the coronavirus has learned how to sort of, sneak in by binding to that receptor. Okay.
Right.
But so if you're sick and you're coughing all over people, what you're coughing is actually like infectious virus, as opposed to little fragments, little snippets of dead virus that actually got killed by your body's own immune response to the fact that it's been subjected to viral infection.
Yeah, that kind of backs up the whole idea where we've always thought that you're only going to get infected by someone who's actually sick and showing symptoms, whereas if you're not sick and showing symptoms, you're never going to worry about that person.
There still remains the possibility of what's certainly of pre-symptomatic spread, right? So if a person is kind of brewing an illness and the virus is replicating in them day by day, then yes, there's still a possibility of spread. But again, remember that just casual contact with them, walking past them in the street while you're walking their dog and they're walking their dog, there's no way you're going to cop a sufficient what's called viral load from just walking past a person, either in the shops or in a supermarket or whatever, for you to actually get enough of that virus to become sick. When you look at what is defined as a contact, so for the purpose of contact tracing, what is defined as a contact is someone who has been very close to you for at least 15 minutes. Right. So again, this is not casual contact. This is not you walking past someone at the shops. This is not you walking past someone who just happens to be sitting on a park bench eating their lunch. There's no way that you can get sick from that kind of contact. And in fact, again, in this Chinese study from the Annals of Internal Medicine that I showed you before, that the primary setting. So the majority of cases where an infected person, a person who was sick, kind of passed it on to somebody else, was someone in their own household, someone that they lived with, someone that they shared the same bed with, ate meals with, sat down on the sofa and watched TV with, that sort of thing. Okay? It's not casual contact. You do not need to be petrified. Is going to make you sick. In fact, even if they did cough on you, it's unlikely that would infect you. It's close, sustained contact. That is capable of transmitting enough of a viral load for you to actually get sick. And I personally think that it is extremely worrying that we're now causing, particularly children, especially kids in school, are being essentially told that everyone around them is a potential vector of infection, and you shouldn't hug your friend, and don't sit too. It's really, really worrying. Humans need close physical contact. We need it for our mental health, and quite frankly, we need it for our immune function as well.
Absolutely.
We in the same way that our gut microbiota benefit from an extremely varied plant-based diet, our microbiota in the gut, on the skin, in the respiratory membranes benefit enormously from diversity, from coming in contact with a wide variety of bacteria, fungi, viruses, all sorts of microscopic life and non-life forms.
Absolutely.
Non-life
I
forms
mean,
being
even
viruses.
for babies, in the first few months of their life, a lot of their microbiome comes from, their parents. And, like being in contact
Absolutely.
with parents, saliva of the parents, like hand in the
Yeah,
mouth.
bacteria on the
Yeah,
mother's breast when
mother's
she's
breast.
breastfeeding.
Yeah,
Yeah,
absolutely. And like you might feed them, and you might finish off that spoon, then feed them again. And, like that's what we do.
absolutely.
That's what we do, and that's and
Yeah,
and like part of
totally.
our microbiomes in our mouth. So passing that
100%.
on.
Like if you look at how women in traditional societies who don't have blenders, how do
Yeah.
they prepare baby food for their kids? They chewed it up and
Yes.
then they kind of, for want of a better word, spat it into their baby's mouths. Dogs do the same thing, right? So a mother dog will eat a meal and then she'll regurgitate it for her babies.
Yeah.
Wolves do the same thing. They
Yeah.
go on hunt, they bring down an animal, they eat it, they go back to the members of the wolf pack who had to stay home and they regurgitate it. So I know people go, ooh, that's gross. Well, that's the way nature works. It's kind of gross.
Yeah, birds do it all the time. I mean, like it's just I think we're so far actually pushed away from our natural environment now, and we're so scared of nature and like being
Yeah.
involved in obviously um
And now people are scared of each other,
that's
and
the
this is
worst.
this is horrifying. This is awful. This
Mm,
is it's psychologically devastating, but it's physically threatening as well.
yes.
People's stress hormone levels go up dramatically if they don't have physical contact with other people.
Yeah.
One of the reasons why people in nursing homes benefit from having like a therapy dog come in
Mm,
is that when you pat a dog, your own blood pressure goes down. Well, it
mm,
turns out that when you hug a person, your blood pressure goes down too. Why does it go down? Because your stress hormone levels are affected by that physical contact.
mm.
And now people are being told, don't touch, don't. Like, it makes total sense to not do that with a person who is sick. And
Yeah.
and look, I'll grant you, because obviously a lot of your audience are people who are dealing with an autoimmune disease. Some of them might be on medications, they might be immunosuppressed.
Mm,
So I'll grant you, in a circumstance like that, if you feel yourself to be vulnerable at higher risk, by all means, you wrap yourself up in a bubble and make sure that you kind of vet the contact that you're having with other
mm,
people. I'm totally down with that. That's fine.
mm,
Elderly people, frail people who are on chemotherapy, although I
mm-hmm.
must say people who are immunosuppressed are actually turning out to have a less serious course of illness with this particular disease
Mm,
because of this phenomenon known as antibody-dependent enhancement, whereby an overly exuberant immune response
yeah.
to the
Yeah.
virus can actually cause lung damage, right? But
Mm,
but but I would still say, if you have very great concerns because of your current
mm,
state of physical health and you still want to sort of sequester yourself to some degree, I'm all for it. I'm not going to tell you to go to a party and hug 15 total strangers. Not at all. I'm saying for people who are currently healthy and vibrant and eating well and getting their sleep and exercising regularly and
mm,
and uh, and don't have any reason to be concerned about their health, like their normal weight and all the rest of it.
mm.
There, the idea that you should be terrified of contact with other people makes no sense at all. It
Yeah.
just makes no sense.
Yeah.
And as you said before, never before have we ever quarantined the healthy.
Healthy.
This is not how you handle infectious disease.
No.
The only way out of an epidemic of respiratory disease, like a respiratory tract infection, is through the gaining of herd immunity.
Mm-hmm.
Now, the prospect of gaining herd immunity with a vaccine is number one. Even if a successful vaccine that was safe was developed, it is several years off.
Mm-hmm.
That's the reality.
Mm-hmm.
All of the talk about we're going to have it by the US election, or we're going to have it by next year. Yeah, not if you speak to the people who are involved in vaccine development. Number two, the vaccine candidates that are sort of proceeding the fastest through the pipeline right now, the Oxford vaccine, which is being developed by AstraZeneca, did not in fact prevent transmission of the virus. So it did cause, slightly less severe symptoms in the monkeys that were given the vaccine. However, it didn't actually prevent them from being infectious or passing the virus on. So clearly, there's no way of getting herd immunity from that vaccine. So how do we get herd immunity? The way we've always done it. The virus passes from person to person to person, and eventually it just runs out of susceptible people to infect. Now, the good thing is that because there is substantial what's called cross immunity, so because T cells, this sort of very important cell type in the immune system, because around 40 to 60% of the population already have T cells that have encountered previous coronaviruses and have successfully, overcome them. They can recognize and respond to what are called epitopes, like certain segments of genetic material on SARS-CoV-2, and they can head it off at the pass without the person getting sick, without them even developing antibodies against it. So that's, somewhere between 40 and 60% of the population who are protected. They're actually not susceptible. And that means that in order to gain herd immunity, we may only need somewhere around 10 to 20% of the population to actually become infected and to recover. And what Dr. David Katz and many others have been saying from very early on in the piece is what we should be doing is we should be risk stratifying. So we take people who are at most risk of a bad outcome. We already know who they are. Absolutely. And we've known since the first case series came out of Wuhan. They're the elderly. They're the people with heart disease, diabetes, people undergoing treatment for cancer, although that came out of the original case series. Now no one's quite sure about that, but let's just throw them in for good measure. And people with high blood pressure. So we, sequester them. We keep the nursing homes really protected. Anyone who's in those categories, stay home. They should be being sent food and in-home care, so that they can just sit there and wait it out. And then everyone else who is at very low risk, like vanishingly small risk of death and a very low risk of serious outcomes, off you go. Go to school, go to work. They're not going to overwhelm the healthcare system. Now, will some people get sick? Sure, because that happens with every virus.
And people are still getting sick now.
Young people die of the flu. Even children die of the flu. Far fewer young people and children are dying of SARS-CoV-2 infection than die of influenza.
That's true.
Right. In the US last year, I believe they had 114 children aged under 18 who died of influenza. They're nowhere near that with COVID-19, with that age group. So, so unfortunately, it is a fact that some people will get sick. A small percentage of them will die. Every death is sad. Every death, like it's a terrible, terrible thing. But it is not possible to just hide in our basement and hope this virus will go away. Virus is going to do what viruses do, and that is they move through the population until they've reached a point where they can't go any further because no one else is susceptible to them.
That's it. Completely agree. And I think, we're not politicians or public health officials or anything like that, but it just sounds like the common sense thing to do. And it seems like the countries that have done it the worst have done the opposite, where they started putting infected people into the nursing homes and exposing the elderly. And, places like New York and Melbourne's another example.
Yes. And unfortunately, Sweden did a very poor job of managing that. Too. And they've accepted that. They've accepted that was their biggest mistake, that they did not protect the nursing homes well enough. And in Sweden, they happen to have very, very large nursing homes. So, hundreds of old, immunosenescent people, all in the same facility. So once one gets it, it's just like wildfire.
Yeah.
But there are plenty of case reports in the medical literature that show that the previous coronaviruses, the ones that just circulate in the general population, if they get hold of an elderly person in a nursing home, they can rip right through like wildfire. And there was a case in 2003 at the very tail end of the SARS epidemic, which it was in a nursing home in British Columbia. And all these elderly people started getting sick. They were getting pneumonia. There was a high death rate. And the PCR testing originally indicated that it was SARS. And everyone had a freak out because they thought that they're thinking, how did the SARS virus get to a nursing home in British Columbia? It turned out that PCR test was actually inaccurate. And it was one of the 4 commonly circulating coronaviruses, the OC43 strain, which in everybody else just causes, either nothing at all or like common cold symptoms. But you get it in an elderly population. There was an 8% mortality rate, right? None of the staff got infected, none of the staff died. 8% mortality in the elderly people. So we know just how much harm a coronavirus can do, even a common garden variety one that kids at school are getting all the time. We know how much harm it can do in an elderly susceptible population, and they absolutely need to be adequately protected. We've done a terrible job of that in Australia. I think it's around 50% of our deaths have occurred in nursing homes. That's kind of on the higher end if you look at the numbers internationally.
Yeah.
So we clearly have not been protecting the elderly the way we should have, and that's what's largely accounting for our higher death rate. But certainly the approach that has been taken in this country and also in New Zealand is extremely counterproductive when it comes to the development of a robust herd immunity, which is the only way to stop a respiratory pandemic.
Absolutely. And, I mean, from where I'm sitting, there don't seem to be any solutions. Do you just want to keep the population locked down forever? What happens when you open your borders? What happens when you let people from...
strategy?
Yeah.
And the thing to bear in mind is that the lockdowns are killing people. They're killing people in a number of ways. They're killing people in very immediate ways. For instance, there has been noted in countries all over the world that there's a substantial decrease in the numbers of people fronting up to hospital with symptoms of a heart attack or a stroke. So what are we to conclude from that? Has SARS-CoV-2 cured heart attack? Yeah, I don't think so. What's happening is people who are having heart attack symptoms are staying home. They're staying home either because A, they don't want to burden the healthcare system because they've been told to flatten the curve, or B, they're afraid that if they go to hospital, they'll actually get the virus. And so they're having heart attacks, and they're either suffering heart damage that could have been prevented if they'd presented to hospital early, or they're actually dying at home of a heart attack that if they had gone to hospital and received appropriate treatment, they could have survived. The same with strokes.
Yes.
And I've also heard of or read a number of case reports where people have died of diabetic coma. So this is where an insulin-dependent diabetic, usually a type 1, sort of injects too much insulin. Their blood sugar level, drops dramatically, and then they go unconscious. And again, a diabetic gets to know the symptoms of a hypo, and they know to seek medical attention. But there have been a number of cases, as I say, where diabetics have not sought medical attention and they've died of a completely preventable situation. So they're your immediate deaths. And then the longer term deaths relate to things like, undiagnosed cancers. So people, not turning up to have suspicious symptoms checked out, and therefore not being diagnosed at an earlier stage when treatment may be more successful. Depends on the cancer type, but it may be.
Yeah.
And then, of course, you've got the what are called deaths of despair. So when you effectively destroy a society's economy. So you cause small businesses and even medium-sized businesses to fail, and even airlines to be laying off staff left, right, and centre. When you cause people to become unemployed,
what happens is you actually increase the death rate. Now, it's not immediate. It's not like people dropping dead of heart attacks that could have been prevented. But this death rate is measured in the months to years after the event which caused, the economic collapse. In the US, there's very reliable data indicating that for every 1% increase in the unemployment rate, there will be 37,000 additional deaths, additional premature deaths.
Right.
There was a Productivity Commission report in New Zealand which estimated the cost-benefit analysis of just 5 additional days of lockdown, and found that the risks, or like the costs, outweighed the benefits by a factor of, if I remember serves me correctly, was 68 to 1. 68 times more cost than there was benefit. It was one additional life saved, but an incredible loss of life in terms of, increased suicides as a result of bankruptcies, people developing alcohol problems or relapsing into addiction. It's an absolute nightmare what is being done to people presently. It is not evidence-based. This has never been done before. It wasn't Sweden that was conducting some sort of wild experiment. Sweden was doing what countries have always done before.
That's right.
Right?
Yeah.
It's the rest of the world that's been conducting an experiment going into completely uncharted waters. And the results that we're seeing are not good.
No.
Not good.
And I mean,
this experiment is
it's fascinating for me, because when this all first started, the whole terminology was around let's flatten the curve. They were never saying that they were going to save people from dying from the virus. They were saying let's flatten the curve so that we don't overwhelm the hospital system, and then the excess deaths that come with overwhelming the hospital system, we want to avoid those. But we don't want to avoid deaths from the virus because we can't do that. And now all of a sudden we can somehow magically avoid deaths from the virus?
Yeah. It's what's known as mission creep. Okay, so the initial mission was to flatten the curve, and I agree with you. That actually makes some sense.
Yeah.
Like, try to interrupt the transmission of the virus so that hospitals can gear up, they can, equip their ICUs, they can make sure that they've got personal protective equipment for the staff, they can basically get ready for the onslaught, which of course in Australia never happened. Our hospital system never looked like being close to being overwhelmed, and in fact that healthcare system overwhelm only happened in a very small number of isolated pockets throughout the world. Never happened in Sweden, that's for sure. And that was one of the things that they were calculating. Can our healthcare system actually deal with any overrun? Well, they never had an overrun.
Right.
So yes, the flatten the curve thing, all right, that's fine. If you actually look at that sort of diagram that everyone's seen of, like, here's the curve if we let it run, and here's the curve it's the same number of deaths from the virus.
Exactly.
If you calculate the area under the curve, you either get the deaths over and done with quickly, or you spread them out over a longer period.
That's
the
what I
only
always thought
reason
about
to
it.
flatten the curve is that if the healthcare system becomes overwhelmed, then number one, the people with the infection who do present to hospital may not receive appropriate treatment, and number two, people who have the heart attacks or whatever might not get seen because the hospital is overrun with infected people. But as I say, it became apparent very soon in Australia that our healthcare system was not going to be overwhelmed.
That's right.
So the justification for flattening the curve disappeared, and then we ended up with this bureaucratic mission creep, where we went from flattening the curve to now we're going to stop the virus. To which I could only say good luck with that, because that genie was out of the bottle. There was already substantial community transmission. And the whole idea of contact tracing at a point where there's substantial community transmission is also ludicrous. It's like contact tracing is something that in epidemic management you do at a very early stage. So you try to figure out, like, you basically tracking the virus. That's the purpose of contact tracing. You do it early. At this stage in the game, it's absolutely pointless. When there's widespread community transmission, you can't, like, if you get sick, how are you going to know whether it was Joe or Fred or Marge who gave you the virus, right? You're not, because it's moved through the population.
Yeah. So I mean, and
So
I don't
there's
think it's just that people have forgotten about the whole flattening the curve and the fact that they were never going to
yeah,
stop the deaths from the virus ever. You know, there were always going to
no,
be, if there was going to be 5,000 deaths in one country, there was either going to be 5,000 deaths in 1 month or in 5 months. And that was, and it's still
correct.
going to be
That's
like that. If you look at
exactly
New Zealand, where
right.
I'm
I mean,
from,
and the only thing that can really intervene in that
yes.
is, and it can't intervene completely. Like, there's no way that you can bring that death rate down to zero, right? Because again, if you're looking at very elderly and very, very sick people, even if you had a UBU treatment for this particular virus, they're actually just going to succumb to the next virus that they encounter, an influenza virus, a different coronavirus. These people are just, they're extremely sick. I mean, the average the average age at death from SARS-CoV-2 is pretty universally in different populations the average life expectancy. So people are, on the whole, are losing perhaps a couple of months, at worst, maybe a year of life. Honestly, if you look at most calculations, it's a couple of months.
Right.
And I think we should definitely be putting a lot of emphasis on developing better treatments for those who are elderly and sick. For you and I and other younger people who aren't in those risk groups, what we need to be focusing on is just all the things that people ought to be doing to stay healthy. Eat a plant-based diet with an abundance of fruit and vegetables. Get outdoors. Get your vitamin D. Exercise regularly. Get your 7 to 8 hours of sleep per night. Do your stress management. Ensure that you have the amount of social contact that is good for you. Extroverts need more, introverts need less, but everyone needs some. So do all of those things which we know assist the operation of the immune system, bearing in mind that we have both an innate immune system and an acquired immune system. So when we were told initially, this is a novel coronavirus and no one has immunity to it, that's actually wrong. Now, we didn't know that it was wrong in the sense initially, like, no one knew about this cross immunity, this T-cell mediated cross immunity from contact with other coronaviruses. No one knew about that. So that's fair enough. However, to say that people have no immunity is actually it's somewhat of a distortion of how the immune system works, because the innate immune system is like the first responder to an incoming pathogen. So the innate immune system just recognizes things that don't look quite right, and it combats them. The acquired immune system, which is where your T cells and B cells come in, antibody production, all that sort of thing, that actually takes a week or more to really gear up to the point where it can knock off the infection. In the meantime, your innate immune system is working hard to protect you. And the innate immune system is very, very affected, as is the acquired immune system, but the innate immune system is very affected by your nutritional status, by your stress level, by the amount of sleep that you have or haven't had, and also by your aerobic fitness. Okay? So, and yet, what were people told to do? Their exercise was limited. They were told to stay home. They closed the national parks, for heaven's sake. I mean, the whole, like, the transmission of respiratory viruses is really diminished when you're outdoors for a variety of reasons, particularly when the air is humid. And when did this virus hit our shores? January, February, middle of summer, high humidity, high air temperatures. So it's kind of like everything that should have been done to support public health across the scale, right? So to encourage young, healthy people who had a low risk of serious illness to just, like, do what they needed to do to support their immune function, go outside, get exercise,
eat healthy,
have social contact, eat healthy, all that sort of stuff, and then batten down the hatches on the nursing homes. Everything that should have been done was not done, and it's almost like the opposite of what should have been done was done. And look, I mean, as I mentioned, I have a public health degree. First class. See that? All right, the gold one up on the wall there. That's my first class honours degree, right? So, and I really, really enjoyed the study of public health, and public health is absolutely fascinating. It's kind of like the poor cousin of medicine. It's not even really within medicine. But the basic premise of public health is that any intervention, any public health intervention should be tailored to do the maximum benefit and the minimum harm. And that means that interventions actually need to be adjusted to different subpopulations within a population, right? So, and this present case illustrates that point really, really well. We did not have a tailored and sort of nuanced version of what to do for each different population segment, even though, as I say, we already knew when we started seeing increasing cases, we knew who was susceptible and who wasn't.
And we knew that based on past experience too, right? Like not just because of this, it's just past experience with these kind of diseases is that they affect the elderly population. So if you're going to do any kind of restrictive kind of movement, it should be on those types of people.
Yeah. Yes, that's exactly right. It's those who were very, very clearly known to be susceptible from the get-go, from those early case reports. I mean, we didn't just have the Chinese example; we also had Italy. And we saw the same thing happening there. It was the elderly, it was people with obesity and diabetes and heart disease. It was very, very sick people, very old, sick people who were getting extremely ill with this and who were dying. So we knew enough to have a more intelligent and targeted public health approach than we did. But now it's extricating ourselves from this corner that we've backed ourselves into, when I say us, like as a nation, is pretty difficult because you've got a whole lot of people who are just terrified of going outdoors, and parents who are too scared to send their kids to school, and people who are too scared to go back to work. And oh my goodness, how do you sort of reassure people? No, it's okay, it's fine. You can go back to normal life, and protect Granny by all means. My mother's 88, right? I am aware that elderly and frail people need to be protected, but that doesn't mean that your kid can't go to school if your kid doesn't have any contact with Granny.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't think the elderly want to spend their last few months or last year or so of their life stuck in their house either, okay, you've survived and you've stayed alive, but what have you done? You haven't seen your family.
Well, as a matter of fact, a lot of elderly people are probably dying. I mean, just anecdotally, I've heard from a number of people that their elderly relatives have basically given up. Like, they don't want to only see their grandkids by Zoom. And, to be honest, I really think that people should be given the choice, right? If I were 95 and someone said to me, you've got two choices, right? You either don't see your grandkids and you have no contact with anyone other than the relative stranger who works in the nursing home or whatever other facility you're in. And if you do that, you'll live maybe an extra month because you're 95 and you're old anyway. Versus, your grandkids could come visit you. You can go down to the shops and have a coffee with a friend or whatever, but you might get this virus and you might get sick and die, and that might shave a month or 2 months or even 6 months off your life. I think I would probably say, I'll stuff it. I'll go and have a coffee with my friend. I actually don't drink coffee, but I have a herbal tea.
Neither do I. But still,
with a friend, and I'll hug my grandkid. Thanks all the same, because the idea of living in a bubble for the last 6 months of my life doesn't greatly appeal to me. No. There are worse things than death and loneliness and social isolation. are quite literally worse than death, or many people judge them to be. And frankly, each person is an expert on their own experience. So if you said to me, I'd rather be dead than lonely and isolated, I think that's fair enough.
Mm-hmm.
And you should be given the choice as to how you live your life.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I think, my biggest reflection, I think we'll probably end the conversation here. It was very insightful, and thank you for going through the research. I think my biggest reflection on this, and I've been locked down for a long time, okay? So I've had a lot of time to reflect on this. I think I've probably been in lockdown since March, and I've only had like a few weeks where it hasn't, but it's been locked down the whole time, like just been different levels of it, right?
Yeah.
And my biggest reflection is that neither my life or any life of the members of my family is worth more than your freedom.
Yeah.
I don't want to be selfish enough to say that because I want to survive this, you have to stay in your house and wear your mask and do all that kind of stuff, just so my minimal risk of dying is evaded. And I think that was my biggest reflection. I was like, this is no way to live. I can't see, we've just had a baby. My parents can't come and see him. They're in New Zealand. We're here. This is not human kind of compassion. This is not. Yeah, I mean, that's not the kind of world
I agree.
Personally, I mean, people watching this may be different. This is not the world I want to live in. I'm going to put that on the record. Not the world I want to live in.
I fully agree.
Yeah.
I mentioned that my mum is 88. She lives in Sydney. I live on the Gold Coast now. I have been able to see her exactly once since March. Now, normally I fly down to Sydney every 3 weeks. I have clients there, or I stay with my mum. I help her out with things. There's only been one trip that I could make, like that brief period of time when the border was open and I could go down there. My mum is, my stepfather just died in April, my mum's second husband. She is very lonely. All of the things that she normally does, little bus trips where they get older people on a bus, they take them to gardens and, museums and that sort of thing, all that's cancelled. She can't do any of that. Her, Probus Club meetings, all that sort of garden club, cancelled. So there's my 88-year-old mum stuck at home without me to stay with her and visit her, without any of the contact that she has with other people who she's got friendly with. So will she live any longer as a consequence of being protected from the virus? It's pretty hard to say, because I think she is at least as likely to die prematurely of loneliness as she would be to die prematurely of getting this virus.
Absolutely.
Right?
I can't disagree with you on that, and yeah, I think people really need to reflect on this and really think about what kind of world we want to live in. And, yes, do we want to let fear drive our lives, or do we, if we let fear drive our lives, let's not get in the car to go and travel. It's not, because you have a risk of dying in that too. That's just my personal.
We do. I agree. We need to have a really good, hard think about how we define selfishness versus compassion, and the kind of lives that we want to live, because this whole episode has put people really out of balance with themselves and with their friends and loved ones, and with total strangers. It's been incredibly destructive to everything that really makes us human.
Absolutely. Yep. All right. Well, guys, I think it was really important for me to get Robyn on here, because Robyn has been someone who's been very actively talking about this a lot, and it's been very inspirational. I'm sure she's had a lot of backlash from this, but she's kept her truth, and she's been true to herself, and she's looked at the evidence, as you can see. One thing I really value about Robyn, and she's been a friend of mine for a little while now, is that everything she does is very evidence-based. And, you know, for her to say something, she just will not just say it because she feels something. She will do her research, she will thoroughly investigate, and she will, you know, make sure she crosses her T's and dots her I's before she puts anything out there. And, you know,
That's very true.
and so I'm not just saying this because, you know, Robyn's written a couple of articles. I've known her for a while, a few years now, and, you know, I've seen the work she's done, and I've seen the success she's had with clients, and she knows about health. And, you know, if you want to know about health, you know, you really have to listen to the people who are helping people get better, not the people who are, you know, just sick care, you know. And that's something we, you know, we really kind of base very strongly is, who are the people getting the results? Who are the people who, you know, are making sure that they are using the evidence to, you know, do things that, you know, really the medical community thinks is impossible at the moment. So, you know, full credit to you. You know, I'm really, you know, it's an honor to have you on the program again, and yeah, keep sharing, I think, and we'll try and do the same as much as we have the capacity to. And yeah, it's, you know, we're not trying to undermine, you know, any of this conversation is not trying to undermine what's going on, or say that, you know, that this is not real. This is not what we're trying to say here. What we're saying is the response to this is exaggerated dramatically, and it doesn't need to be that way. And we need to look at a different way of doing things, and we need to use a targeted approach to make sure that the people who are most at risk are safe. And we haven't done that, to be honest, as a population, as a community. So let's have another look at the evidence.
Fully agree with everything you've said. Thank you so much for the opportunity to, you know, to talk to your people. And yeah, so I'm not here to tell you what to do or what not to do. Certainly, you know, if you're in Melbourne and you're in lockdown conditions right now, I'm not here to tell you to break the law. What I want to do is just encourage everybody to look at the evidence. And that's not what you're seeing on the 6 o'clock news, right? It is so easy these days for people to access the medical literature. And I agree, some of the studies are hard to understand if you don't have a background in this. They use a lot of jargon. But the research is available for you to access, and I would just encourage everyone to question assumptions, question anything that I've said. Go and read the studies. Again, I'll include some links, Shukul. You might want to put them in the, you know, show notes.
I'll actually share those 2 articles even on your website about the PCR test, and I think a lot of all the references should be in there that you've kind of used.
Most of them, although I do have a couple of new ones.
Okay,
so I'll
send me those
new ones as well. Yeah. Fine. Okay. Fantastic.
Okay, and I do encourage you to read those articles. They're impressive. You know, they're really impressive. And
Thank you.
yeah, I've thoroughly enjoyed reading your posts, and you know, keep it up. You know.
No. I have, as you can imagine, I have had some people sort of kind of losing the plot with things that I've been sharing. I'm like, well, don't argue with me, argue with the authors of the study that I just shared, because that's what I generally do on Facebook. I generally share studies, you know, in the peer-reviewed medical literature. So again, if you have an argument with that, better contact the author of the study rather than me.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, so thank you guys all for watching the video. If you've made it this far, really appreciate you taking the time to watch it. And yeah, you know, if you want more, I'm sure we can organize it. If you have any specific questions, ask them in the comment section, you know.
Absolutely. And happy to answer any questions.
Yeah, 100%. Absolutely. So, and again, thank you, Robyn. And for the rest of you, we'll see you next time. And make sure you eat plants, and lots of them. Take care.
Lots of plants. Bye.
Bye.